Sometimes the people who lose everything are the same people who stop someone else from losing their life. The rain came down hard enough to turn the streets of Brookdale into silver rivers. Car headlights blurred against the wet pavement. Umbrellas folded backward in the wind. Students in navy blazers rushed through the gates of Crestmore Academy, shielding laptops and designer shoes from the storm. Nobody wanted to be late today. Not today. Inside the main auditorium, a clock the size of a movie screen counted down the final minutes before the Callaway Future Leaders Scholarship interviews began. One scholarship. Full tuition. For years. A chance at a life most kids in Brookdale only saw in commercials and college brochures. And for Claire Bennett, it was everything. Her future fit inside a thin blue folder clutched tightly against her chest as she sprinted across the sidewalk in soaked sneakers. Her blonde hair stuck to her cheeks. Water dripped from the sleeves of her faded gray coat. She had stayed up until 2 in the morning rehearsing answers while her mother slept at the kitchen table beside unpaid bills and a cold cup of coffee. Grace Bennett worked 6 days a week, cleaning homes she could never afford to enter through the front door. Some nights, she came home barely able to stand. But every morning she still smiled at Claire and said the same thing. "You're going to have a different life than me." Claire believed her. She had to. Because without this scholarship, there was no college. No escape. No future beyond overdue rent notices and second jobs. Thunder rolled across the sky as Claire reached the final intersection before school. Then she heard it. Tires screeching. A shout. A bicycle skidding across wet asphalt. Claire turned just in time to see a teenage boy collapse near the curb beside a black SUV. His backpack slid across the street. One sneaker disappeared beneath a parked car. People gasped, but nobody moved. Several students stood frozen under the awning outside a coffee shop. One man lifted his phone and started recording. A woman muttered something about calling 911, but never dialed. Rain hammered the pavement around the boy as he struggled weakly to sit up. Claire looked toward the school entrance. The giant auditorium clock flashed in her memory. 3 minutes. That was all she had left before the interview doors closed. 3 minutes between poverty and a future. Then she looked back at the injured boy lying alone in the rain. Her breathing shook. "Come on," she whispered to herself, terrified. The school bell rang in the distance. Students rushed past her toward warm hallways and dry seats, an opportunity. Claire closed her eyes for one painful second. Then she dropped her scholarship folder into a puddle and ran toward the stranger. She knelt beside him instantly, ignoring the freezing water soaking through her uniform. "Hey, stay with me," she said softly. The boy winced, trying to focus on her face through the rain. He couldn't have been older than 16. Dark hair, expensive watch, fear in his eyes. Claire carefully removed her coat and folded it beneath his head to keep him off the cold concrete. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice crackled through the speaker while rainwater streamed down Claire's face. Around them, cars crawled past. People stared. Nobody helped. "There's been an accident," Claire said quickly. "Please hurry." The boy's fingers weakly grabbed her sleeve before she could stand. "Don't leave," he whispered. Claire looked again toward Crestmore Academy. Through the rain, she could barely see the glowing front entrance now. The doors were closing. And just like that, her future slipped away while she sat in the middle of the storm holding the hand of a stranger she had never met. What Claire Bennett didn't know was that the injured boy lying beside her was Ethan Callaway, the only son of billionaire William Callaway, one of the most powerful men in America. The ambulance arrived 7 minutes later, but for Claire Bennett, it felt like an entire lifetime had passed in the rain. Red and blue lights flashed across the soaked intersection while paramedics rushed toward Ethan Callaway with a stretcher. One of them praised Claire quietly after hearing how she had kept him calm and conscious until help arrived, but the words barely reached her. Her eyes stayed locked on the massive stone clock tower above Crestmore Academy. 11:43. The scholarship interviews had started 13 minutes ago. Her stomach dropped. The paramedics carefully lifted Ethan into the ambulance while his weak grip slowly slipped from her sleeve. For one strange moment, he looked frightened to let go. "Wait," he said softly through exhausted breaths. "What is your name?" Claire hesitated, rainwater dripping from her chin onto the pavement. "Claire," she answered quietly. Ethan tried to say something else, but the ambulance doors closed before the words came out. Then it was over. The sirens faded into the storm, leaving Claire alone in the middle of the street with wet clothes, shaking hands, and a future disappearing 1 second at a time. She looked down and saw her scholarship folder floating near the curb, papers soaked through and smeared with ink. Slowly, she bent down and picked it up. The blue folder that once felt like hope now looked like trash. The walk to Crestmore Academy felt longer than ever before. Students filled the hallways inside, laughing and talking about interviews and college acceptance letters. Their polished shoes clicked against marble floors while Claire's soaked sneakers squeaked with every step. Water dripped from her sleeves onto the expensive tile. Heads turned as she passed. Some students stared openly. Others wrinkled their noses at her soaked appearance before whispering behind perfect white smiles. Claire kept walking. At the end of the main hallway stood the auditorium doors. Closed. A sign beside them read in elegant gold lettering, "Scholarship interviews begin promptly at 11:30 a.m. No exceptions." Claire's chest tightened. She wiped rainwater from her face and knocked softly anyway. No answer. She knocked again, harder this time. Finally, the door opened just enough for Principal Margaret Holloway to step out. Her pearl necklace gleamed under the hallway lights. Her expression did not change when she saw Claire standing there drenched and trembling. "Miss Bennett," she said coolly. "You are late." Claire swallowed hard. "I know, ma'am. There was an accident outside school. A boy got hurt, and the interviews began 13 minutes ago," Margaret interrupted. The rules were explained very clearly. Claire's voice cracked despite her effort to stay composed. "Please, I had to help him." Nobody else stopped. For a brief second, something almost human flickered across the principal's face. Then it vanished beneath professionalism. "Responsibility requires sacrifice," she said. "Unfortunately, your timing reflects poor judgment." The words landed harder than the rain ever could. Claire stared at her in disbelief. Behind the auditorium doors, she could hear applause and cheerful voices. Futures were being decided just a few feet away while hers dissolved in silence. Then another voice joined the moment. "Oh my God," Sophie Lancaster said with a laugh from farther down the hallway. "Did somebody pull her out of a sewer?" Several students beside her snickered quietly. Sophie walked closer, her designer heels tapping sharply against the marble floor. Her blonde hair was flawless despite the storm outside. "You missed the biggest opportunity of your life helping some random guy on the sidewalk," she asked mockingly. "That is actually sad." Claire gripped the ruined folder tighter. Sophie glanced at the soaked papers in Claire's hands and smirked. Maybe poor people should stop acting like they belong at Crestmore in the first place. Margaret Holloway did not correct her. She simply folded her hands together and spoke in the same cold tone. "The scholarship committee has made its decision. Your interview slot has been forfeited." Claire felt something inside her quietly break. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a small painful crack deep in her chest. She nodded once because speaking felt impossible. Then she turned and walked back down the endless hallway while students watched her leave in silence. Outside, the storm still had not stopped. Claire Bennett reached home just after dark with rain still dripping from the edge of her sleeves. The apartment building on Maple Street looked older every winter. Rust stains streaked down the brick walls. One hallway light flickered above the entrance like it was too tired to keep trying. Claire climbed 3 flights of narrow stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last. Her soaked scholarship folder rested against her chest like something fragile that had already died. Inside apartment 3B, the smell of tomato soup and laundry detergent floated through the tiny kitchen. Grace Bennett stood at the stove in pale blue scrubs from her evening cleaning shift, stirring a dented pot while quietly wincing every few seconds when her lower back tightened. She looked exhausted. Her blonde hair was pinned up loosely, and there were faint shadows beneath her eyes that makeup could no longer hide. But the second she heard the front door open, she smiled anyway. "How did it go?" she asked immediately, hope filling her voice before she even turned around. Claire froze. The question hit harder than anything Sophie Lancaster had said earlier. Grace switched off the stove and faced her daughter fully. The smile faded at once. Claire tried to speak, but her throat tightened painfully. Water dripped from the ruined folder onto the floor between them. Grace's expression slowly crumbled as she understood. "No," she whispered. Claire nodded once. That was all it took. Grace lowered herself carefully into one of the kitchen chairs like her legs suddenly could not hold her anymore. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, rain tapped softly against the apartment windows while an old radiator hissed unevenly near the wall. The tiny kitchen suddenly felt smaller than ever. Claire finally sat across from her mother and explained everything quietly. The accident, the ambulance, the closed doors, the principal, Sophie Lancaster's laughter. Grace listened without interrupting once. Her tired hands remained folded tightly together on the table the entire time. When Claire finished, silence settled heavily between them. Then Grace reached across the table and took her daughter's cold hand gently into both of hers. "You did the right thing," she said softly. Claire looked down immediately. "It does not feel like it." Grace's eyes filled with tears she clearly did not want Claire to see. Doing the right thing and being rewarded for it are not always the same thing. Claire stared at the chipped kitchen tiles beneath her sneakers. That scholarship was our only chance. The words came out smaller than she intended. Grace looked away toward the stack of overdue bills near the microwave. One envelope already had a bright red final notice stamped across the front. The apartment lease renewal sat underneath it untouched. Claire knew exactly what her mother was calculating in her head because she had been doing the same math for months. Rent, utilities, bus fare, groceries, college applications. Dreams had numbers attached to them in poor families. And most dreams cost too much. Grace forced herself to smile again, though it trembled badly this time. "We will figure something out." Claire almost broke apart hearing that because they both knew there was nothing left to figure out. Grace already worked morning and night shifts cleaning offices downtown and wealthy homes in Brookdale Heights. Some weeks, she barely slept 5 hours a night. Claire helped where she could, tutoring younger students and shelving books at the public library after school, but it was never enough. It was never even close. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Grace stood slowly and opened the apartment door. Mrs. Ramirez from next door smiled kindly while holding a foil-covered casserole dish. "I made too much chicken bake again," the older woman said gently, pretending not to notice Claire's red eyes. Grace thanked her quietly and accepted the dish with both hands. The apartment smelled warmer after that. Kinder somehow, but Claire still felt hollow inside. Later that night, long after Grace fell asleep on the couch with unpaid bills scattered beside her, Claire sat alone at the kitchen table beneath the weak yellow light overhead. Her ruined scholarship papers lay spread out in front of her, the ink blurred into unreadable blue stains. She stared at them for a very long time. Then slowly, with trembling fingers, she folded the papers back into the damaged folder and whispered the words she could never say in front of her mother. "I am sorry." Across the city, inside the private wing of St. Vincent Medical Center, Ethan Calloway woke up asking only one question. "Where's the girl who saved me?" St. Vincent Medical Center did not look like a hospital. It looked like the lobby of a luxury hotel. Marble floors reflected soft golden lights from crystal fixtures overhead. Fresh white orchids sat beside leather chairs that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Nurses moved quietly through the private executive wing, while security guards stood near every entrance with hidden earpieces and dark suits. Outside room 701, 3 executives from Callaway Financial waited anxiously beside 2 attorneys and a family physician who had worked for the Callaways for nearly 20 years. Nobody sat down. Nobody relaxed. Because inside that hospital room was Ethan Callaway, the only son of William Callaway. And William Callaway loved exactly one thing in this world: his son. The billionaire arrived 12 minutes after landing at Brookdale Executive Airport. His black sedan stopped beneath the hospital canopy before the rain had even fully slowed. Hospital staff straightened immediately the moment he stepped inside. William Callaway moved through the lobby with the cold, focused energy of a man used to controlling rooms the second he entered them. At 58, he carried himself with quiet authority rather than loud arrogance. His charcoal overcoat still glistened faintly from the storm outside. Silver streaks cut through his dark hair at the temples, and exhaustion shadowed his eyes beneath the surface calm. One of the executives hurried toward him. "Sir, Ethan is stable." William did not slow his pace. "What happened?" "Minor bicycle collision outside Crestmore Academy. The doctors say he was fortunate someone acted quickly." William stopped walking then. "Someone." The physician stepped forward carefully. A student stayed with him until emergency services arrived. According to Ethan, she likely prevented the situation from becoming much worse. William's jaw tightened faintly. Where is she now? Nobody had an answer. Inside room 701. Ethan rested against white hospital pillows with an four-line taped to his arm. The second he saw his father enter, relief softened his tired face. William crossed the room immediately and sat beside the bed, without caring that rainwater still darkened the shoulders of his expensive coat. You scared 10 years off my life, he said quietly. Ethan gave a weak smile. Sorry. William brushed damp hair away from his son's forehead in a rare moment of visible tenderness. Since Ethan's mother died 5 years earlier, the two of them had become each other's entire world. William built billion-dollar deals during the day and still made sure he was home every night for dinner with his son. Business magazines called him ruthless. Investors called him brilliant. But Ethan knew the truth hidden beneath all of it. His father was simply terrified of losing the last person he loved. The girl, Ethan said suddenly. Did they find her? William looked at him carefully. What girl? Ethan stared toward the rain-covered hospital windows. Everybody else just stood there watching. His voice grew quieter. She did not. William listened silently while Ethan explained everything. The rain. The panic. Claire kneeling beside him on the street while everyone else kept walking. The coat beneath his head. Her hand gripping his while the ambulance came. She missed something important because of me. Ethan whispered finally. I could tell. William's expression changed slightly at that. What do you mean? Ethan frowned, replaying the memories slowly. She kept looking toward the school, like she was running out of time. William stood without another word and walked toward the hospital room door. Find out who she is, he instructed his security director outside. I want traffic cameras, witness statements, school reports, everything. Yes, sir. And one more thing. The security director stopped immediately. William's voice lowered. Find out what she lost helping my son. Meanwhile, across Brookdale, Claire Bennett sat at the public library wearing the same faded sweater from the night before. Stacks of scholarship applications surrounded her while she quietly erased and rewrote numbers on a legal pad beside a calculator with weak batteries. Tuition estimates, bus routes, community college transfer programs. She was trying to rebuild an entire future out of scraps. Around her, students talked excitedly about dorm rooms and campus visits and acceptance letters. Claire kept her head down and continued calculating silently, because hope was cheaper than quitting, even when it hurt. William Calloway built his empire on one belief. Every problem had an answer if you were willing to look deeper than everyone else. That philosophy turned a struggling investment firm into one of the most powerful financial companies in America. It also made him dangerous when someone he loved was involved. By sunrise the next morning, his security team had reconstructed nearly every minute of the accident outside Crestmore Academy. Video footage from traffic cameras flickered across a massive monitor inside William's private office overlooking downtown Brookdale. Rain blurred most of the images, but one detail remained painfully clear. Dozens of people stopped to stare. Only one person ran toward Ethan. William watched the footage silently while his security director stood nearby, holding a tablet full of reports. Claire Bennett appeared on the screen wearing soaked sneakers and a faded gray coat as she knelt beside Ethan in the middle of the storm. William leaned forward slightly. Play that again. The footage replayed. This time William noticed the smaller details. The panic on Claire's face when she realized Ethan was hurt. The way she removed her own coat without hesitation. The way she kept glancing toward the school entrance while still refusing to leave his son alone. Who is she? William asked quietly. The security director checked his tablet. Claire Bennett, 17 years old, senior at Crestmore Academy, academic honors student, part-time library assistant. He paused briefly. Lives with her mother in Maple Street Apartments. William continued watching the screen. Claire was soaked completely through by the rain, but she never once stepped away from Ethan. And what exactly did she lose helping him? The security director hesitated this time. A full academic scholarship interview. William slowly looked up from the monitor. Explain. According to school records, Miss Bennett arrived 13 minutes late for the Callaway Future Leaders Scholarship interview after remaining at the accident scene with your son. William's expression hardened instantly. They denied her over 13 minutes? Yes, sir. The office fell silent except for rain tapping softly against the glass windows 70 floors above the city. William stared back at the frozen image of Claire kneeling beside Ethan on the screen. Then another report appeared on the tablet. There is something else, the security director added carefully. Claire's mother works for a residential cleaning company. William barely reacted at first. So, one of her assigned properties is the Callaway residence in Brookdale Heights. That caught his attention immediately. What is her name? Grace Bennett. William frowned faintly, trying to place it. Then memory surfaced slowly. A quiet woman with tired eyes who always arrived early and left late. A woman who never spoke unless spoken to. He remembered once seeing her carefully fixing a loose picture frame in the hallway, while most staff ignored it completely. Ethan had been around 11 then. He had offered her homemade cookies from the kitchen because he noticed she skipped lunch to keep working. Grace had cried afterward when she thought nobody saw her. William had never forgotten that. 8 years. The security director continued softly. Grace Bennett has worked in your home for 8 years. William looked back toward the frozen image of Claire on the screen again. Something about the realization unsettled him deeply. The daughter of the woman quietly cleaning his house had sacrificed her future to save his son, while powerful educated adults stood watching from dry sidewalks. Across town, Grace Bennett vacuumed the upper hallway of the Callaway mansion in complete silence. The estate stretched across nearly 12,000 square feet of polished marble, glass walls, and priceless art. Morning sunlight poured through towering windows while classical piano music drifted softly through hidden speakers in the ceiling. Grace moved carefully despite the pain in her back because wealthy homes demanded invisible perfection. A house manager reviewed floral arrangements nearby without acknowledging her existence. Grace preferred it that way. Her thoughts stayed on Claire all morning. She worried about the way her daughter barely touched dinner the night before. She worried about tuition bills and rent, and the quiet hopelessness hidden behind Claire's forced smiles. As Grace emptied a trash basket near Ethan's study, she noticed framed photographs scattered across his desk. One picture showed Ethan smiling beside William during a fishing trip in Montana. Another showed father and son laughing courtside at a basketball game. Grace paused briefly, staring at the photographs with tired eyes. "You are lucky," she whispered softly to the smiling boy in the frame, without even realizing it was the same boy her daughter had saved in the rain. 3 days passed before Claire Bennett saw sunlight, without rain clouds hanging over Brookdale. By then, the story of the scholarship interviews had already faded from Crestmore Academy hallways. Wealthy students moved on quickly from other people's disappointments. New gossip replaced old gossip. College banners still hung proudly across campus walls while seniors talked about beach trips and dorm shopping and graduation parties that cost more than Claire's family spent on groceries in a month. Life kept moving forward for everyone except her. Claire sat alone beneath a maple tree near the edge of campus during lunch period with a notebook balanced across her knees. Numbers filled every page. Tuition estimates, financial aid deadlines, community college transfer options. She erased and rewrote calculations so many times that gray smudges covered the sides of her hands. Across the courtyard, Sophie Lancaster laughed loudly with friends beside the fountain while holding iced coffee in one hand and car keys to a white Mercedes in the other. Claire tried not to look in that direction anymore. It hurt less that way. Her phone buzzed suddenly beside her notebook. "Mom." Claire answered immediately. "Hey." Grace sounded tired. More tired than usual. "Sweetheart, I might be late tonight. Mrs. Davenport added another property to my schedule." Claire closed her eyes briefly. Another property meant another 12-hour day. "Mom, you need rest." Grace laughed softly, though it carried no real humor. "Rest does not pay electric bills." Claire swallowed hard and stared down at the notebook full of impossible numbers. "I can pick up more shifts at the library." "No." Grace's voice became firmer instantly. "You focus on school." Claire almost reminded her there might not even be a school future left anymore, but she stopped herself. Grace had already sacrificed too much carrying guilt she did not deserve. "Okay," Claire whispered instead. After the call ended, Claire remained beneath the tree for several minutes listening to distant laughter and football practice whistles drifting across campus. Everything around her felt bright and full of momentum while her own life stood perfectly still. Then a black luxury SUV rolled slowly through the front gates of Crestmore Academy. Students immediately noticed. Conversations quieted. Heads turned. Even Sophie Lancaster lowered her sunglasses slightly to stare. The vehicle stopped near the administrative building, and a tall man stepped out wearing a charcoal coat despite the warm afternoon sun. William Calloway rarely appeared in public without attracting attention. His face appeared regularly on financial news channels and magazine covers beside headlines about billion-dollar mergers and political influence. But in person, he looked less polished than television ever showed. More tired, more human. Principal Margaret Holloway hurried outside to greet him with nervous enthusiasm. Claire only glanced up briefly before looking back down at her notebook. Men like William Calloway existed in worlds far above hers. Their paths never crossed. Except today they already had. Inside the administrative building, William ignored the expensive coffee waiting in Margaret Holloway's office. He stood instead near the windows overlooking campus while holding Claire Bennett's student file in one hand. "You denied her scholarship interview because she arrived 13 minutes late?" he asked calmly. Margaret adjusted her pearl bracelet anxiously. "Mr. Calloway, Crestmore Academy values discipline and punctuality above all else." William's eyes remained fixed on the file. Above humanity? Margaret stiffened slightly. "The committee cannot make emotional exceptions." William finally looked at her then. His expression remained controlled, but something cold settled beneath his voice. "My son is alive because that girl made an emotional exception." Silence swallowed the office. Margaret attempted a careful smile. "Surely you understand institutions require consistency." William stepped closer to the desk slowly. "Consistency is admirable when it protects fairness," he said quietly. "It becomes cruelty when it punishes compassion." Margaret's face lost color. Outside, students gathered near hallway windows whispering excitedly, while security personnel moved through campus discreetly. Rumors spread instantly. William Calloway was here. Nobody understood why. Not even Claire, who still sat beneath the maple tree unaware that the most powerful man in Brookdale had spent the last 72 hours thinking about a poor girl in soaked sneakers who chose a stranger's life over her own future. Back inside the office, William placed Claire's student file carefully onto the principal's desk. "There will be a scholarship gala tomorrow evening," Margaret said cautiously, trying to regain control of the conversation. "Your foundation is sponsoring the event." William nodded once. "Good, good," Margaret repeated uncertainly. William adjusted the cuff of his coat slowly before answering. "Because I believe it is time everyone at Crestmore Academy learns what character actually looks like." The Crestmore Academy Scholarship Gala was the kind of event Claire Bennett had only seen in movies. Crystal chandeliers glowed above rows of white linen tables. A string quartet played softly near the ballroom staircase, while waiters carried silver trays filled with sparkling drinks and tiny desserts too elegant to identify. Wealthy parents moved through the room wearing tailored suits and diamond jewelry, while photographers captured smiling students beneath banners that read "Future Leaders of America." Claire stood near the entrance feeling painfully out of place in a navy blue dress borrowed from Mrs. Ramirez next door. The hem was slightly too long, and the sleeves fit awkwardly around her shoulders, but it was the nicest thing she had ever worn. Beside her, Grace Bennett adjusted Claire's necklace gently with trembling fingers. "You look beautiful," she whispered. Claire forced a small smile. "I still do not understand why Principal Holloway invited me." Earlier that afternoon, the school office had called unexpectedly requesting Claire attend the gala as a special recognition guest. No further explanation followed. Grace almost told her not to go because bus fare alone felt irresponsible right now, but then she saw the look in Claire's eyes. Beneath the disappointment and exhaustion, part of her daughter still wanted to belong somewhere. So they came. As mother and daughter walked into the ballroom together, conversations shifted subtly around them. Claire noticed it immediately. Wealthy families smiled politely while quietly assessing shoes, jewelry, posture, status. It was the kind of room where money spoke before people did. Sophie Lancaster stood near the center stage wearing a silver designer gown while surrounded by friends from the scholarship committee. The second she noticed Claire, her expression tightened with disbelief. "Seriously?" Sophie muttered loudly enough for nearby students to hear. "They invited her?" A few nervous laughs followed. Claire lowered her eyes instantly and guided Grace toward a quieter table near the back wall. "Ignore them," Grace whispered softly. But Claire already recognized the familiar feeling settling inside her chest. The feeling of being tolerated rather than welcomed. Across the ballroom, Principal Margaret Holloway moved anxiously between donors and faculty members while checking her phone every few seconds. She looked less confident than usual tonight. At exactly 7:30, the ballroom lights dimmed slightly. The quartet stopped playing. Conversations faded into anticipation. Then the main doors opened. William Calloway entered first beside his son Ethan. The entire ballroom seemed to inhale at once. Wealthy donors straightened immediately. Faculty members smiled too quickly. Even Sophie Lancaster's arrogant expression vanished beneath instant admiration. Ethan looked healthier than he had in the hospital photographs circulating privately through school administration. A faint bruise remained near his forehead, but he walked steadily beside his father wearing a dark tailored suit. The moment Claire saw him, confusion swept across her face. Ethan stopped walking too. Their eyes met across the crowded ballroom, and recognition hit both of them at the exact same time. "It was you," Ethan said softly, almost amazed. Nearby conversation slowed. William followed his son's gaze toward the back of the room, where Claire stood frozen beside Grace. For one quiet second, the billionaire simply looked at the girl who had changed everything. Claire instinctively stepped backward. "I should go," she whispered to her mother, panic rising in her chest. Grace touched her arm gently. "Claire," but the ballroom had already gone silent. William Calloway slowly walked toward them while cameras from local media crews shifted direction instantly. Every wealthy parent in the room watched carefully. Sophie Lancaster stared openly in confusion. Principal Holloway looked like she could barely breathe. William stopped directly in front of Claire and Grace. Up close, he looked older than television interviews ever showed. More tired, more real. Ethan smiled faintly at Claire first. "You stayed with me in the rain," he said quietly. Claire nodded once, unable to speak. Then William looked toward the entire ballroom before turning back to her. "3 days ago," he said calmly, his voice carrying through the silent room, while dozens of people stood safely under dry awnings watching my injured son alone in the street, one person chose compassion over convenience. Claire's heart pounded painfully. She could feel hundreds of eyes fixed on her. William continued. "That person was Claire Bennett." The silence became absolute. Sophie Lancaster's expression slowly drained of color. Principal Holloway lowered her gaze toward the floor. William's voice hardened slightly now. "What shocks me most is not that this young woman saved my son." He paused. "It is that she was punished for it." The silence inside the Crestmore ballroom felt heavier than the crystal chandeliers hanging overhead. Nobody moved. Nobody even reached for their drinks anymore. Wealthy donors sat frozen in their seats, while faculty members avoided eye contact entirely. Claire Bennett stood near the back table with her hands trembling beside her borrowed navy dress, wishing she could disappear beneath the polished marble floor. But William Calloway was still looking directly at her. "I reviewed the footage myself," he continued calmly. "Dozens of adults watched my son lying injured in the rain. Some recorded videos. Some walked away." His voice lowered slightly. Claire Bennett was the only person who stopped. Ethan stood quietly beside his father, holding something folded carefully in his hands. Claire recognized it instantly. Her gray rain-soaked coat. It had been cleaned neatly, but she still remembered placing it beneath his head on the pavement. Ethan stepped forward slowly. "You stayed even when you knew you were going to be late," he said softly. Claire swallowed hard. "You were hurt." Ethan looked down briefly before answering. "Nobody has ever chosen me over something important before." The honesty in his voice stunned the room into even deeper silence. William turned then toward Principal Margaret Holloway, standing rigid beside the stage. "This school teaches leadership," he said. "But leadership without compassion is simply privilege wearing a nicer suit." Margaret's face flushed red beneath the ballroom lights. "Mr. Calloway, the scholarship committee followed institutional policy." William nodded once. "And that policy punished the best example of character this institution has seen in years." Sophie Lancaster lowered her gaze immediately, while whispers spread through nearby tables. One donor quietly removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead uncomfortably. Another faculty member looked visibly ashamed. Grace Bennett stood beside her daughter, unable to speak. Her eyes filled slowly with tears she had spent years teaching herself to hide. William reached into the inside pocket of his coat and removed a dark blue envelope embossed with the Callaway Foundation seal in silver. He walked toward Claire and held it out carefully. "Claire Bennett," he said quietly enough now that only the nearest tables could hear clearly. "3 days ago you lost a scholarship because you chose humanity over personal gain." Claire stared at the envelope without moving. "Tonight, I would like to correct that mistake." Gasps rippled softly through the ballroom. Claire looked at her mother first, because she genuinely could not process what was happening. Grace covered her mouth with trembling fingers. "The Callaway Foundation," William continued, "is awarding you a full academic scholarship to any university in the United States." The ballroom erupted into shocked whispers. Several students turned openly towards Sophie Lancaster, whose expression had completely collapsed. But William was not finished. "In addition," he said calmly, "your mother will never have to clean another house to keep you in school again." Grace looked stunned. "Sir, William gently raised a hand. "Your daughter saved my son when nobody else would. There is no debt greater than that." Tears rolled silently down Grace Bennett's face. Claire looked overwhelmed, like she no longer trusted herself to breathe correctly. Ethan smiled faintly and held out the folded gray coat toward her. "I wanted to give this back myself," he said. Claire accepted it carefully. The fabric felt softer now, warmer somehow. Ethan lowered his voice slightly. "You probably do not realize this, but when I was lying there in the rain, I was terrified." Claire looked at him quietly. "I was too." Ethan laughed softly through lingering emotion. "Yeah, but you stayed anyway." Across the ballroom, cameras flashed rapidly now, while reporters scribbled notes furiously. One headline had already written itself before the night even ended. Principal Holloway finally stepped forward, her voice unsteady. "Claire, on behalf of Crestmore Academy, I would like to apologize for the way this situation was handled." Claire looked at the woman who had closed the doors on her future only days earlier. For a moment, everyone waited to see anger or revenge appear in her face. But Claire simply nodded politely because kindness had always come easier to her than bitterness. William noticed that too, and somehow, that moved him more than anything else had all evening. The orchestra began playing softly again, while conversations slowly returned across the ballroom. But something fundamental had shifted in the room. The wealthiest people in Brookdale had arrived expecting a celebration of achievement. Instead, they had witnessed a lesson about dignity from the poorest girl there. Summer passed slowly after the scholarship gala, but for the first time in years, the Bennett apartment no longer felt trapped beneath fear. The overdue notices disappeared from the kitchen counter one by one. Grace Bennett stopped accepting double shifts that left her limping through the apartment at midnight. Some evenings, she even sat still long enough to drink tea beside the window while listening to old jazz records she had not touched since Claire was little. The silence inside their home changed too. It no longer sounded heavy. It sounded peaceful. Claire spent most of July preparing for college orientation at Columbia University in New York City. Even saying the words out loud still felt unreal sometimes. Columbia University. The kind of place she used to see only in movies or library brochures with smiling students wearing expensive coats and carrying impossible confidence. Now her acceptance packet sat carefully inside a drawer beside the same blue scholarship folder that once dissolved in the rain. Some nights Claire would open both just to remind herself how quickly life could change. One rainy afternoon in late August, a black sedan stopped outside Maple Street Apartments again. But this time Claire was not standing in a storm losing everything. She was sitting beside Grace on the front steps sharing French fries from a paper bag while neighborhood kids played basketball nearby. William Callaway stepped out of the car alone, wearing a simple navy sweater instead of one of his usual business suits. Without television cameras or security teams surrounding him, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a father who had finally slept properly again. Ethan climbed out beside him carrying 2 cardboard boxes awkwardly in his arms. "Move-in supplies," he explained with a grin before Claire could ask. "My father bought half the office store." William gave him a dry look. "You bought the mini refrigerator." Ethan shrugged. "College survival is important." Grace laughed softly for the first time around William Callaway, and the sound surprised even her. Over the past few months, something unexpected had grown between the two families. Not obligation. Not charity. Respect. William never treated Grace like invisible staff again. He greeted her by name, asked about her back pain treatments, listened when she spoke. And Ethan texted Claire almost every day now, usually terrible jokes or pictures of expensive food he pretended not to like. The friendship felt easy in a way neither of them expected. Later that evening, while Ethan struggled unsuccessfully to fit the mini refrigerator into the apartment elevator, William stood quietly beside Claire near the sidewalk. Sunset painted the old buildings gold around them, while traffic hummed softly through Brookdale. "You changed something important in my son," William said after a long silence. Claire looked down shyly. "I just helped him." William shook his head gently. "No. You reminded him what kind of people still exist in the world." Claire did not know how to answer that. William looked toward the neighborhood basketball court where children laughed beneath flickering streetlights. "When my wife died, Ethan stopped believing people stayed when things became difficult." His voice grew quieter. Then a frightened girl in soaked sneakers refused to leave him alone in the rain. Claire felt emotion tighten painfully in her chest. William smiled faintly then. "You gave him something I could not buy no matter how much money I have." Upstairs, Grace watched through the apartment window while holding one hand over her mouth. For years, she had cleaned luxury homes where people barely looked at her long enough to say thank you. Now one of the most powerful men in America stood outside her building speaking to her daughter with genuine gratitude in his eyes. It did not feel real. A week later, Claire Bennett stepped onto Columbia University's campus carrying 2 suitcases and wearing the same gray coat she had once placed beneath Ethan's head in the rain. Students hurried across stone walkways beneath enormous trees, while parents carried boxes into freshman dormitories nearby. Everything smelled like autumn leaves and coffee and possibility. Grace cried quietly before Claire even reached the residence hall doors. Ethan hugged her goodbye dramatically like they were starring in a war movie, while William shook her hand firmly before surprising her with a brief, awkward hug afterward. "Your mother is going to call you every 4 minutes, Ethan warned. "That is not true," Grace protested immediately. "It will be every 6 minutes." Everyone laughed. Claire looked around the beautiful campus one last time before turning back toward the people standing beside her. A billionaire, his son, a tired single mother who once cleaned houses to survive. None of them should have ended up here together. But life had rewritten the story the moment one frightened girl chose kindness over convenience in the middle of a storm. And sometimes, that is how the world changes. Not through power or money or influence, but through ordinary people who stop walking away when someone needs them most.